thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. It is really fantastic to be with you. And I'm looking forward to a high level of engagement and participation from you all today. I could see that last week, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to learn a lot from each other. So like Bon said, he hopes to learn from me. I hope to learn from you all. So we will move forward through part 3 of course planning, which, as you know, is focused on goals and objectives. So in the digital modules, you are introduced to backwards planning to design your course goals. And then you also walked through the process of utilizing Bloom's taxonomy to design your course objectives. So I just love to see, at least for those who have a video, if you found the digital videos helpful. Was this information you already knew? Were there pieces of videos that added to your knowledge? A thumbs up if you feel like they were helpful, medium if you feel like they were slightly helpful, and if you felt like they weren't helpful at all. And you can be very honest. That's one of the beauty of teaching. All right, Bon, 2 thumbs up. All right, I see some thumbs ups. So we'll continue to prepare some videos prior to our sessions together as a way to cover more material and in an attempt to share more deeply and create some higher order thinking when we're together. So that will be one of the goals. As you saw in those videos, we have a roadmap for this module. So you've already covered 1 and 2, and today we'll dig into some particular approaches, in particular SMART and ABC methods for designing course objectives. This is all in preparation for your deliverable for this course and this program, but also as a foundational step in your own development of courses. You all are faculty leading your own courses, designing and developing new ones, even modifying existing ones. So we hope that these will be tools that you can apply right now, and then as you continue to enhance and improve your courses. So by the end of this session, I hope that you will be able to identify components of clear objectives. And I expect that you'll be applying best practices, either using SMART or ABC to develop course objectives. So one of the things that Dr. Bon introduced you to last week is this idea that we'll apply a variety of learning strategies. So what you've already seen is some facilitated discussion over a virtual format, me asking you questions, expecting feedback, and then integrating it into our overall conversation. Sometimes that means shifting how you're teaching, what you're teaching to meet the needs of your learners, but it becomes a very active way to engage in the content. We'll have some think, pair, share activities, which will be in the form of breakout rooms. And that's where I'll pose a question, just like Dr. Bon did last week. And that will be an opportunity for you to share and receive feedback in a small group setting. And then we'll also try out a quiz or a poll through the virtual platform, just as an additional way to have a low stakes assessment. And while we're not covering assessment today, we will be covering assessment techniques in 2 weeks' time. So this will be a way to lay the foundation for you and think about ways that you can quiz your learners, if you're not already doing that, based on your objectives and your goals. All right, so we'll start again with a question. What is this? For those of you, you're all very young. So this is an instrument you would not likely have used, but maybe you would have been exposed to in a history course. I'll give you a hint. If any of you are sailors or go out in the water, I like the references to boats and water.
Is this a compass?
Really, really great. Yeah, so it's a navigation tool, exactly. It is a nautical sextant. And what would you use a compass or a navigational tool to do?
Okay, just to find our direction, to know where we are going.
Fantastic. Exactly, to find your direction. And so, as we know, the North Star is the brightest star in the constellation. You can see it from Ethiopia. We can see it from here in the US. And as we know from history, and while we have GPS now, we didn't historically, and due to its consistent position in the sky, right? At one time, sailors used the North Star as a navigational tool. And they could use this sextant, right, as a way to measure the angle between the northern horizon and the North Star. And so while we no longer use the North Star as a navigational point, or this particular tool to determine our direction, it's still really used quite heavily as an icon. For human curiosity, for exploration, and essentially, this is a metaphor that that tells us that to maintain a straight course, you need to have two anchor points. You need to have a North Star, which is your grand vision or your goal, and then you need to have your horizon, which is more of a near-term objective. And so you can chart your path based on your horizon and your near objectives, but ultimately you need a goal in order to get there. And so we use this analogy, this metaphor, really to provide this conceptual difference between a goal and an objective. And so it makes sense in kind of an intuitive way, but when we actually build it out, it becomes more complicated. So we'll go straight into the questions that were asked. So once again, what's a goal and what's an objective? So the first one, participants will describe the difference between goals and objectives. Is that a learning objective, or would that be something more like a course goal? Dr. Adoza, now that you can see this, what would be your answer to that question?
I think it is objective.
Great. So when we think about why this might be an objective, what would be a reason that you would have chosen this as an objective?
So this is a clear and measurable. So the difference between goals and objectives, so to know or to identify these two things is a clear and it's not broad so much. So that's why I say it's objective.
Fantastic. So you're exactly right. It's clear, it's measurable, it's quite specific. Yeah. You can imagine how you might assess the learner to determine whether or not they know the definition of a goal or an objective. Great. The second question, and this was divided amongst the two people who responded, and I'm not sure who the two people who responded were, so you're anonymous, so you're off the hook. Participants will understand and use a systematic approach to curriculum design. Is that a goal or an objective?
Goal.
Okay, and why is that a goal?
Because it's not short, it's not precise, and it's not measurable. It doesn't use action verbs.
Great. Yes, and it's so broad that you probably wouldn't teach that in one course session, right? It would take many sessions over a course to teach. Great. Participants will identify one course goal and 3 objectives for their instructional unit. Dr. Dastalem.
I think this is objective.
Wonderful. And why do you think this is an objective?
It's very much specific and it's measurable. You can imagine how to, I mean, it's just immediate in the result of your teaching.
Great. So you already see some quantitative indicators, right? That
Yeah.
give you a sense of you could measure if a student had learned that. Great. And the last one, participants will appreciate the importance of educational theory in the development of an academic course. Dr. Hinnock.
This is a goal because
Wonderful.
this is not measurable. It is a broad topic. We should be taught through some time, and it is not also, it is kind of specific, but it's not measurable. It will take some time to accomplish this goal.
Fantastic. So you all get an A+ for this quiz. Great job. You're exactly right. So this idea that you're moving from a broad course goal to a more specific objective, then to even more specific assessment of those objectives and your teaching approaches that are appropriate. And when you think last week about what Dr. Bond introduced in terms of the learning theory, you can think about what might be your specific teaching approach to really drive home the specific content or skills or attitudes that you'd like to impart on the students and for them to demonstrate, more importantly. So there's this ultimate learning endpoint of the goal and this interim point that you can maybe measure during each session you're together, how you determine progress, and then how you get there and what you do to get there. So that leads us back to backwards design. And this was something that, that we talked about specifically in part 1 of the digital modules. You had a reading as well. For some of us, Elizabeth Rose and I in particular, this comes naturally now. We do it without even thinking when we're designing courses. But I'm curious, and I can just have a show of a hand if you were familiar with the backward design approach prior to this course, or if it was new to you. So a show of hands of how many people this was a new approach, that they had not either heard of this approach or applied it themselves. All right, so I'm Dr. Mata. Okay, so no, so most people, this was a new approach. Great. Okay, and this is helpful for me to know. So even getting that feedback from you, I know that this is an opportunity to continue to present pieces of this approach or this framework so that it can build out your toolkit, so it becomes just as familiar for you to use as it does for Elizabeth and I to use at the Institute for Global Health. So the goals and foundations, the reason we're spending so much time on this is that they essentially provide the foundation for your overall course. So if you have a weak foundation of a house, for example, if it's built on water or unstable ground, then the entire structure is compromised, right? And you can think about the same analogy for a course. If your goals and your objectives are not strong, then the course is vulnerable to falling apart and the students not achieving the goals that you have in mind, either that you've articulated or not. So what we explored in backward design in part 1 was how to apply this kind of framework and approach to our own curriculum development. And it's by no means a new methodology. It's existed in various forms and has experienced varying degrees of popularity since it was first introduced by curriculum design expert Ralph Tyler in 1948. And so by now you're familiar with this phrase that he coined, beginning with the end in mind. And so when we think about it and we look at this visual representation, it starts by defining your course goal and outcomes, and then selecting your assessment, and then selecting the instructional strategies and course format. And what is one of the main advantages of this approach? I mentioned it in part one, but it harkens back to Dr. Bond's presentation last week. What would be one of the main advantages to using the backward design approach?
So backward design will help us in fixing our assessment method, so that we will know what our students have learned. So making the assessment easy for us as a teacher.
Fantastic, great. What might be some other advantages to this approach? Yeah, Dr. Blinn.
So I think it will also help us to plan for our teaching methods, or how we are going to instruct as well.
Excellent, excellent, right. So those are two fantastic rationales for using this. Additionally, it's a learner-centered model, right? So whereas traditional curricular approaches really are instructor-centered, when you adopt a learner-centered model, and one that the backward design approach really helps to flesh out, then the active participation and engagement of students in their own education is required. So I think that what I found using this design and thinking about how do I assess students, how do I determine the appropriate strategies, I'm really thinking ultimately about the active engagement of my learner and how they can engage in the course content and promote ultimately higher learning. So really fantastic. So let me ask you, since you've already demonstrated competence in so many areas, let me ask you, what is this? What is this? Well, there might be a couple of answers to that question. Why would you use a map? Great, so it provides more information so that you know where to go, right? Excellent. So just like you use a map to find your way to different zones in Ethiopia, you would use a course map to help you guide your learners towards the end goal of the class or the course. So, so that regional map, the zone map, was really helpful, right? But have you ever used a map that's really confusing? So maybe that's something that's led you astray down the wrong path to the wrong destination. That was really frustrating, right? You thought, oh, I have this map, it's gonna tell me where to go, and then you end up in the wrong place. So while we don't want that for our own experience, if we're traveling in Ethiopia, we also don't want to do that to our learners. So essentially a course map helps you decide how your course goals will build on one another and how they scaffold. So a course map helps you decide on your course goals, and it helps you think about how you align your course. So alignment is a key part of backward design, and it's visualized through the course mapping process. So it's the direct link between your course goals, your objectives, and then your assessments, your learning activities, and your learning materials. So using a course map template to map out your course is really a great tool to determine the essential assessments and activities that build comprehension and the application of learning material, and helps lead your learner to the achievement of the expected outcomes or goal. So there are many different ways to map out your course. And for this program, we've asked you to map out just one session, but you can build off that session to imagine an entire course. So I use this when I want to build out and align my course components. So if you'll see here, and Dr. Bond presented this on the first day as one of your deliverables, you have your summary session, and then you have your overarching goal or goals, and then you have your learning objectives that are intentionally tied to that goal. your learning activities, which you'll complete for this program, a PowerPoint presentation of your content, a case-based discussion, an additional activity, and then a formative assessment and a summative assessment. We will walk through all of those components in this course, but this will be one of your deliverables. And what this does is a couple of different things. So obviously you're already seeing it. It's forcing you to align each of those components of your course. It's also ensuring that each of your learning objectives is achievable and it has appropriate learning materials and activities associated with it. It shows clarity and transparency of your purpose, your process, your evaluation of that learning, and it prevents information overload. So while we all have lots of information to impart on our learners, we only have a discrete period of time, right, in a course or a session to do that. So if we can map out our session plan, we can prevent some of that information overload and extraneous time that's spent on things that don't actually contribute to the achievement of the learning outcomes. So it also, Dr. Blinn mentioned this, it determines that our assessments accurately, I think it was Dr. Blinn, either way, we had such great comments, this idea that it helps us determine assessments that accurately and fairly evaluate the achievement of learning objectives. So it can really meet a number of different goals. So you'll be practicing with that over the course of these few modules. Each of these are building blocks. So your session or course plan requires well thought out goals and objectives. So that's why we're spending so much time on this today. And Bloom's taxonomy, as you were introduced to last session or 2 sessions ago, brought forward last session, and you'll continue to revisit this, it really should be the guide for the development of your learning objectives. So as we think about kind of the complexity of the cognitive processes we ask students to engage in as they learn. So we're going to go through a couple of objectives before I go into the breakout room. So if we think about objectives and why they're important, so they drive content. So if we look at this example, demonstrate effective patient intake skills in geriatrics. If that is one of our objectives, then it helps us to think about what content we should include. So we should probably include challenges of working with this population, working with older individuals. What about non-communicable diseases that are really associated with this population? You'll likely have to engage with other family members who might be caring for that individual. So the content identification of your learning objectives helps you identify what content you really need to incorporate and what you don't need to incorporate, which is sometimes half the battle. It also helps you drive instructional strategies. So maybe for demonstrating effective patient intake skills, role play is helpful. You have students who role play both the patient, but also the provider, and maybe role play family members as well. So you can test out different scenarios and better understand best practices. Maybe interviews or focus groups or case studies can help you achieve those same objectives. And then they can really drive back to this idea of assessments. So maybe they have to define what is effective in this scenario. They have to create a rubric, or you create a rubric for a final deliverable that helps you know that they've actually reached those objectives. So those are some of the many ways that objectives can help us drive content, instructional strategies, and evaluation.